This is episode 17 of the Relentless Man podcast. Code. Hi, and welcome to the Relentless Man podcast. I'm your host, Modjaiso, and my goal is to help men die empty, to make sure that you die having used up every ounce of potential that is trapped within you. However, to help you die empty, I'll have to be very raw and brutally honest with you. So if you're easily offended, stop listening. If you're easily triggered, stop listening. If you can't handle explicit language, stop listening. If you're fragile, stop listening. Otherwise, let's dig in. In this episode, we're going to talk about code, in particular a code of conduct, and why that's important, and we're going to evaluate various questions related to the topic. However, before we begin, I'd like to urge you to not blindly copy or follow things that I say. What I rather recommend is that you use your own brain, you think about everything I say, and make sure that the actions that you take are the product of your own thinking and decision making. Remember, don't be a follower, be a student. In this episode, I'm going to repeat a format I did before, maybe with a few tweaks, but the idea is I have with me questions about a code of conduct. I'm going to pick a question at random, answer that question, and I'm supposed to do that within at most 4 minutes. When the bell rings, when the alarm rings, I have to switch to a different question. So let's see how that goes. Let me know what you think about this episode. Alright, so let's begin. I'm shuffling the questions. Alright, well, what does question 1 say? Let's see. So this appears to be question 7 on my list. The question is, what do I do if there are conflicts in my code? So a code of conduct, or a code as we're referring to it here, is a set of beliefs. It's a belief system that you will never violate. A set of standards that you uphold no matter what. So now we're thinking about, well, your code could have various standards. For instance, one element of your code may be, if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And another part of your code of conduct may be, I wake up at 9 a.m. So those are 2 parts of your code of conduct. Okay, so when we're talking about conflict, what we're referring to is a situation where two of your beliefs clash with each other. Let's say that you promise somebody that you're gonna meet them at 9 a.m. But at the same time, at 9 a.m., you're supposed to wake up and do your work. So now you have 2 parts of your code conflicting. There's the part that has to fulfill what you say you're gonna do, and there's the part that has to wake up at 9 and do the work. Whatever, maybe work on your craft. What happens in those situations when your code of conduct conflicts? So that's an interesting question. Now, there are obviously a couple of ways to deal with this, but what I recommend is you look at the 2 beliefs that are clashing and you figure out which one is the most important, and you do that one instead. So if it's more important to you to keep your word to your friend, then you do that. If it's more important to you to work on your craft at 9 a.m., you do that. And this situation shows up a lot. Actually, there was an episode when we're talking about beliefs and discipline. We talked a bit about this. So the example is we have a Navy SEAL. Part of his code is he must protect American lives. But then he also has maybe a code of conduct that says you must never hit a woman. Those are 2 parts of his code. But what happens if you have, like, let's say a woman holding a gun and holding people hostage in a mall? Well, is the Navy SEAL going to let her shoot the people, or is he going to hit her in this situation? So suddenly now he has to make a decision and decide which part of his code of conduct is more important, not hitting women or protecting American lives. That's an example, an extreme example, but this does happen. When you have a code of conduct that you're living by, it's easy to have conflicts. I don't know. I actually can't think of any other way to deal with these conflicts in code of conduct. And maybe afterwards you might feel some emotional repercussions of overdoing one thing on your code and violating another thing in your code. In that case, I suggest that you place more emphasis on the thing that you followed. So if you kept your word to your friend and this was more important to you than waking up at 9, then don't focus on the fact that you didn't wake up at 9. Focus on the fact that you actually met with your friend. And so that's what you focus on. So it's a bit of mind play here in the event when your belief systems clash. But obviously you try your absolute best to make sure things don't clash in your belief system. But sometimes it's inevitable. However, unless there's some conflicts, a code of conduct is a sort of thing that you never violate. And any great leader you can look at, any relentless person you can imagine, is the sort of person who has a code and a set of standards that they really never violate. A good example is a guy like Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, part of his code was, look, I'm not going to be free, I'm not going to leave prison if black people are still being oppressed in South Africa. And that was his code. He was like, he doesn't care. He was willing to spend 27 years because that was his standard. If apartheid didn't end, he was gonna stay in prison forever. So that's an example of him having a standard or a code that he was not willing to break. And I recommend that if you don't have one, that you pick up and make one for yourself ASAP. Why should my code serve others? Yeah, okay, just started the clock there. Yeah, so a code is a set of beliefs that you're never gonna be able to violate. And so the question is, what if you have a code that doesn't serve others? That, for instance, maybe your code is, I do whatever it takes to succeed, including taking advantage of people and lying to people and cheating and stealing. Let's say that's part of your code. What's the problem with that? So the thing is that when you listen to this podcast, I assume that you're the sort of person who wants to be relentless, the sort of person who wants to die empty, the sort of person who wants to achieve their full potential. In particular, being a relentless man means that your job is to make the human race better. Your job is to transform society. Your job is to make sure that you make everybody and everything around you better just because you were there. You inspire people. You push them forward. So you see, it's completely contrary to what a relentless man is, to be the sort of person that's taking advantage of people, that's cheating, that's stealing, that's causing them pain. When people are next to you, they are worse off. They are more depressed when they're next to you. This is all things that go completely opposite to what a relentless man is. And that's why it's important that when you have a code of conduct, your code of conduct should be a set of beliefs that serves the community. The set of beliefs that not only makes you better, but makes the community around you better. If your code is immoral, it involves killing people, it involves doing all sorts of mayhem, it involves promoting yourself at the expense of others, well, that's not really a code of conduct. In fact, that is something I completely discourage you from having and disqualifies you from being a relentless man, because a relentless man not only makes himself better, but everybody around him better. So are you able to succeed? Can you have success if you have a completely immoral code of conduct? Well, it depends on what perspective you're looking at it from. If you're looking at things myopically from a limited point of view, sure, if you screw people over, you could get ahead, you could get promoted, but that is only temporary. In the big scheme of things, this sort of attitude will let you down. It will not allow you to realize your true potential. It goes completely contrary to the spirit and soul of a human being. What we're here to do is to make everybody around us better, to push them and to improve them. So, if your code of conduct, if any of your belief system is a sort of belief system that advances you at the expense of others, the sort of belief system that oppresses people, that is not really a code of conduct. And I recommend that you very quickly transform it and make it something that not only empowers you, but the human race as well. Alright, that was under 4 minutes. The next question is, can I get my code of conduct from my religion? Yeah, so notice that I mentioned that a code of conduct is a sort of thing that is just a standard that you never violate. I never said anything about where the standard should come from. The only thing we've emphasized that whatever your code is, it has to be a code that not only empowers you, but the community and makes people better. So there are many places where your code can come from. And indeed, certain religious beliefs are very good codes. There are a lot of things, for example, if you're a Christian, well, there's the 10 Commandments. Some things in the 10 Commandments are the sort of things that make a good code. Do not lie, do not cheat, do not steal your neighbor's wife. Very good values. There are lots of great values in the Bible and other religions. Okay, or like, let's say, Buddhism. There's a lot of beliefs about staying present, about noticing how you're connected to the world, about living to your fullest, about everything you do, doing it to the best of your ability. Those are all things that, if you wanted to, could be part of your code. However, you just have to make sure that the code is the sort of thing that's moving you towards your goals, that's helping you to accomplish your mission, that's helping you to die empty. But where it comes from, there are a variety of sources. In fact, there are a couple I could recommend, like Stoicism. It's, usually philosophy doesn't really focus much on helping you to live better, but there are certain philosophies that are different. For example, Stoicism is different. Stoicism is the sort of philosophy that's very practical. It tells you how to handle your emotions, how to deal with adverse situations, how to control your thoughts, how to do your work in the best way possible, how to choose the work that you do, how to not be so attached to things. There are many people I know of who have adopted Stoicism as their code and have lives that are very admirable. There are people who do that with Muslim beliefs. There are people who do that with Christianity. There are people such as myself who have constructed their own belief system and code of conduct. It really doesn't matter where it comes from. It just has to be a code of conduct that works for you, that enables you to live to your fullest, that enables you to die empty, and also that empowers people and enables people to realize their true potential. What happens if I violate my code? Yes, so when you have a code, we said a code is a set of standards that you'll never violate. But is it possible that you violate your code of conduct? Of course, that does happen sometimes. But sometimes, despite your best efforts, you violate your code. For instance, let's say your code says, I always wake up at 8 a.m. to begin my day and to make things happen in my life. I wake up at 8 a.m. and I work on my craft. What happens if, let's say, during the night, despite your best efforts, you forgot to set your alarm? Or instead of setting your alarm at 8 a.m., you set it to 8 p.m. So you ended up waking up at like maybe 12 p.m., much later than you'd said you're supposed to wake up. So in that sense, you violated your code. What do you do under those kinds of situations? Do you just give up and say, I can't be a relentless man, I'll never accomplish anything, and spiral into depression and sadness? Well, no, that's not what you do. In those kinds of situations, of course, people deal with these things differently. But the way I do it is, one is you don't take it lightly. So people will tell you, the world will tell you to take things easy, not to take it too seriously, to be like, oh, it's okay, no big deal. No. Once you're not taking your code seriously, it's no longer really a code of conduct. And you've stopped being relentless, by the way. So you take it seriously. In this particular situation, okay, I woke up at 8, I did not wake up at 8 a.m. I violated something that's in my code. Okay, so in this case, you're gonna feel emotional pain and you're gonna feel conflict because you violated a belief system of yours. One thing I don't recommend is that at this point you try to make it light or to take it easy. Instead, I recommend that you feel the pain completely, that you punish yourself somehow. You could punish yourself emotionally by saying, look, I did not wake up at 8, I violated my own code, this is unacceptable, how am I gonna achieve my goals? How can I be relentless? How can I die empty? You really take it seriously. You really take all of the pressure. There are a couple of motivators of human behavior. One is punishment and another is positive reinforcement. Punishment is very powerful. For example, many people don't commit crimes not just because they're nice people, but also because there are serious consequences. They'll be punished severely if they break the law. And this makes them stay in line and do what they're supposed to do. You can also harness this power of punishment to your own benefit. If you punish yourself for violating your code, you didn't wake up at 8 a.m., make it a big deal. You could punish yourself by starving yourself, maybe, let's say, missing a meal, or you could just speak harshly to yourself and maybe perhaps channel the voice of a really angry, no bullshit coach or parent. Whatever it takes, you punish yourself and you don't make it okay to break your code. If you punish yourself well enough, but obviously you don't want to beat yourself up too much that you now collapse under pressure or you become depressed. But when you punish yourself enough, it makes it less likely that you repeat the same mistake later. And next time you get back on track and you keep following your code. That's how you deal with cases when you violate your code. But obviously your goal is to make sure that that never happens. But sometimes, despite your best efforts, you violate your code. That is not the time to give up. That's the time to punish yourself, feel the pain, and move on to the next thing. The only case maybe where it's probably not a good idea to punish yourself too much is if you're someone who doesn't know how to punish yourself without reducing your dignity and without feeling worthless. If you're having trouble with worthlessness and depression and suicide, then in those cases I'd just focus on how you're going to make sure that you don't break the code in the future. But once you're emotionally stable, then you want to be the sort of person that punishes yourself, takes it seriously, and then takes steps and makes sure that you never violate your code again. Alright, just run out of time there. So let's move on to the next question. Don't I need willpower to follow my code? Yeah, people always think that to be disciplined and to follow a code of conduct, you have to have a lot of willpower. You have to keep pushing yourself to do things. This is actually not true, because when you have a code, the code is your belief system. It's who you are. It's not the sort of thing that you struck. For instance, many men have inside of their code, it's very likely that's the case with you. You don't hit women. This is who you are. You don't hit women. That's part of your code. It's a sort of thing that, do you really need to work hard to struggle not to hit them? Do you need willpower to not hit women? No, it's just who you are. You can't even envision yourself hitting them. And you might have other codes too. Maybe another thing another belief system that's in your code is, let's say you're always nice to kids. Do you need to struggle? Do you need a lot of willpower to be nice to kids? If it's really a belief system, if it's who you are, then you can't envision acting differently. And this is the same with the code. A code becomes a sort of thing, a standard that you never violate, a standard that is who you are as a person. So sometimes maybe under duress, it might be difficult to maintain your belief system and live in line with your code. You might need some willpower, but on the whole, no, because if it's who you are, you just can't envision acting differently. So when you do willpower, if you find yourself using too much willpower, that's a problem. If you need to constantly force yourself to do things, then it's because you haven't really accepted it as who you are. When something becomes your identity, you don't struggle as much with it. It's just part of who you are. Right, next question. Aren't my community's laws a good enough code? Every community operates by certain laws. There are certain laws and rules you're supposed to keep and observe in order to live in the community. Otherwise, you end up in jail. So the question here is wondering, well, aren't those laws of my community good enough? If I follow those, isn't that a good enough code of conduct? So unless your community is extraordinary, maybe like a community of SEALs or some sort of really demanding military environment, there are certain communities like that where just living up to the standards of the community is going to be a good enough code to help you maximize your potential and die empty. But this is actually rare. Most communities are not like that. For example, I'm almost willing to bet that the laws of your country are not going to help you become a relentless man. In fact, some of them might even work contrary to you achieving your goals and dying empty. This is why I recommend that you actually spend time to consciously construct your own code. Usually the community does not have very high expectations of you. They just want you to, what's the expectation of a school? They want you to just be average or above average. So if you have a C on all your classes, that's acceptable. As far as the community is concerned, that's a good enough standard. If you just get a job and you don't break any of the laws of the country and you follow what your boss says and you get your salary and you retire, that's good enough for the community. That is a code of conduct that's satisfactory for the community. But you see, if you want to be relentless, if you want to die empty, if you want to use up all your potential, then you're going to need a different kind of code. You're going to need to have standards that are higher than the standards of your community. So, for instance, it might be okay for the community might have no problem with you slacking off, with you, let's say, spending a week without working on your craft. The community might be okay with you going to bed without having really done all you could have that day. The community might be okay with you being kind of fine, average at your craft. But you see, if you're a relentless man, if you're trying to die empty, that is simply not an option. Your standard has to be higher. You cannot take it easy if you spend a day and you didn't work on your craft. Your code should not allow you to do less than you can. Your code should not allow you to do mediocre work and be okay with it. That is a standard that the community might not mind, but your code should not allow you to do that, because a relentless man is a leader. And so naturally, if you're a leader, if you're the sort of person that's elevating others, that's pushing the human race forward, that's taking humanity to a place it's never been, in order to do that successfully, you need to have standards that are higher than everybody else, standards that are higher than other members of the community, which in particular means you need to have a code that is much higher, much more demanding than the code that the community has, than the laws that run and govern your country. So, yes, except for certain rare situations, the laws of your country and your community are not good enough. Your standards need to be much higher than those set upon you by your environment. Alright, that was 7 seconds to spare. Alright, next question is, how do I get good at following my code? So the things that you put on your code are things that are belief systems. They're the sorts of things that you don't need to practice to get good at. For instance, if your code has something like, I work on my craft every day, you don't need to practice working on your craft. Whether or not you show up at the time you said you're going to show up and you give your absolute best is something that's completely under your control. You don't need to practice to follow that part of your code. And those are the sorts of things you put on your code. For instance, I always treat people well. You don't need to take courses on how to treat people well. You don't need to take courses on how to respect people. If it's in your code of conduct that you respect those around you, that's the sort of thing that you don't practice doing. It's the sort of thing you can do right now and immediately. You don't work towards getting good at executing your code. Your code is the sort of thing you can execute now correctly. So this whole thing of practicing, getting good at executing your code is already the wrong way to think about it. If you have anything in your code that you need to practice, because practice implies that you need to work hard to get good at it. But you see, things on your code are belief systems, are your identity. There are lots of things in your identity. For instance, if you're a religious person, maybe you're a Christian. So for you, maybe being a Christian is part of your identity. You see, you don't need to work hard to be a Christian. A Christian is who you are. It's your identity. Maybe practicing certain things in Christianity might be hard, but being a Christian, being a follower of Christ, if that's what you believe in, well, that's not the sort of thing that you need to go to school for. It's just who you are. It's your identity. It's not the thing that you practice, right? So certain things are not good to have on your code. For instance, I'm a great piano player. Well, you see, playing the piano is something you practice. You work at being a great piano player. It would take you maybe 10, 20 years to become great at playing the piano. So that's a skill, it's a craft, but it's not your code. Your code is a sort of thing, it's a set of beliefs that you don't practice. It's a set of beliefs that you live by. It's a set of beliefs that you don't violate because it's just who you are. So if you need to practice your code, or if you're looking for lessons to get better at executing at your code, you're looking at it all wrong. You don't practice your code. A code is something you just embody. You make a code right now, you embody it right now. You don't practice embodying it. That's a wrong way to think about it. Certain things need to be practiced, but beliefs and code, a code of conduct are not the things you practice. A thing you embody. It's a thing you decide to do and just do. Alright, what's the next question on the list? Number 25 asks, what if my parents and close friends don't agree with my code? Yeah, so this is actually an important question because, as I mentioned before, as a general rule, the community's expectations of you are not very high. And your community includes your parents. So usually what happens, of course, there are different situations, but usually what happens is your parents have a certain vision they have for you. Your parents maybe want you to be a doctor or a lawyer. They have a path they have planned for you, and usually they haven't consulted you for that path. And usually it's the path that they want you to have. It's really about them. But you see, your path is not necessarily the path that your parents or friends have planned for you. So if you're going to be a relentless man, if you're going to die empty, then you're going to have to start thinking about what really is your path. You're supposed to make your own path. In particular, what this means is that your code is going to be the sort of thing that helps you to get to that path. Now, it's very likely that that code and path that you have, your mission in life, is not the mission that your parents have for you. Let's say you decide that your mission in life is to dance. You want to be a great dancer. That's your craft. But then your parents want you to be a doctor. Okay. So if your mission in life is to be a great dancer, well, then your code is going to be different. Your code might be that every day for 3 hours you dance. You see, that might go against what your parents believe. Maybe your parents, if they want you to be a doctor, then they'll be completely horrified that you're spending 3 hours a day. Instead of reading your books, you're dancing. These are situations where you need to have a backbone. A relentless man has a backbone. Your code of conduct is something you don't violate. So if your code of conduct is a moral code of conduct, if it's a code of conduct that empowers yourself and others, if it's a code of conduct that's leading you towards your mission and helping you to die empty, then at some point you have to draw the fucking line and say, if you're not on board, goodbye. You can't violate your own code of conduct. You can't sabotage your own future. You can't stop yourself from dying empty in order to please your friends and family members. Either they're on board or they're not. If they're not on board, well, then too bad. If they're on board, great. Because you have something to achieve, and you can't let others, people, your parents, your friends, your community, you can't let them dictate where you're going. You know where you're going, and usually they can't see what you see. And so you gotta protect your vision, protect your mission, follow your code of conduct. If you believe in your own code of conduct, just follow it. And if people are not on board, if people don't like it, if they disapprove of it, then too bad. You stick to your own mission because you know where you're going. And usually when it comes to parents or authority figures or the community, like relatives and friends, they don't do it from a bad place. Like parents usually want to keep you safe. They want to make sure that you have a safe life. But you see, if you're going to be relentless, if you're going to die empty, you're going to go to the path. Very likely you're going to have to go through a path that's less traveled. You're going to have to take huge risks. And see, this is the exact opposite of what your parents and your friends want from you, because they want to keep you safe if they are good intentioned people. So they're basically holding you back from realizing your true potential. And at some point you gotta draw a line. You're a man. A man draws a line and says, this is where I'm going. And I'm not gonna listen to anybody else or any people distracting me from my mission in life. This is not the path for me. I know where I'm going, and this is my code, and this is how I behave. Alright, we just run out of time there. So, alright, thank you very much for listening to this episode. Remember that my goal is to serve you. I'm your servant. My goal is to make sure that you realize all of your potential, that you die empty every single day. So if there is any comments you have about the podcast, if you have any questions, please just email me. My email is in the episode description. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening to this episode, and have a relentless week. Bye.